There is a particular kind of silence that only exists in law offices. Not the peaceful kind. The kind that hums with restrained judgment, pens tapping against legal pads, muffled voices behind closed doors, footsteps that never rush. A silence that says, "We decide what matters here. We decide who matters here." The morning I walked into Langford and Cole Attorneys at Law, that silence wrapped around me like a cold, wet sheet. I paused in the doorway of the conference room, fingers tightening around the strap of my handbag. Everyone was already there. My son, Matthew, stood near the window with his hands in his pockets, staring down at the parking lot as if there were something urgent to count in the cracks of the asphalt. My stepchildren, Grant and Elise, sat on one side of the polished mahogany table, their shoulders squared, their expressions carefully composed. And then there was her, Carissa. And then there was her, Carissa. My daughter-in-law, she sat right at the center, where I used to sit beside my husband, Henry, in every formal meeting we'd had over the past 22 years. Her legs were crossed elegantly, high heels pointed, hands folded like some kind of dignified widow, except she wasn't the widow. I was. I took one step into the room. It should have been a simple thing, a widow walking into the reading of her husband's will. But the detail hit me like a slap. My chair was gone. For a moment, my brain didn't understand. The table looked familiar, the floral arrangement in the corner the same, the file cabinet humming quietly, but where my chair always stood at Henry's right side, there was nothing, just empty air. I blinked once, twice. "Good morning," I managed, though my voice sounded small, like it belonged to someone else. Carissa didn't stand to greet me. She didn't offer condolences. She simply leaned back in my husband's son's chair and smiled. It was a sharp, satisfied smile. "You don't have a place here, Lorraine." The words floated across the table and landed like broken glass at my feet. Matthew flinched, but said nothing. Grant smirked, resting an arm over the back of his chair. Elise looked down at her hands, as if the pattern of her nails were the most fascinating thing in the world. I cleared my throat. "Excuse me." Carissa tilted her head to one side. "In case it isn't clear," she said, her voice dripping with false politeness, "this meeting is for family." I let the word hang between us, family. I had cooked Christmas dinners in Henry's kitchen for over 2 decades, sat by his hospital bed through every surgery, held his hand while he threw up chemotherapy into a cracked plastic basin. I knew the pattern of scars on his chest and the way his fingers trembled when he tried to button his shirt in the morning. But according to Carissa, I wasn't family. "Move," I said quietly. "That's my seat." Her smile widened, all enamel, no warmth. "No, sweetheart. It used to be your seat." She glanced around the room dramatically. "Not anymore." Heat crawled up my neck, the kind that comes when you're too old to pretend you don't understand what's happening. Matthew finally turned away from the window and looked at me. Not with anger, not with love either, with something worse, embarrassment. "Mom," he said, rubbing the back of his neck, "maybe you should just sit somewhere else." I stared at him. Somewhere else, as if I were a distant cousin who'd showed up uninvited. "Somewhere else," I repeated, the words tasting like metal in my mouth. Carissa crossed her arms, fingers dancing over the diamond bracelet Henry had given me on our 20th anniversary, the same one she'd commented on at the funeral as a bit much for a second wife. "You really shouldn't be here at all," she said. "After everything you did." I frowned. "What I did?" Her voice rose, just enough for the others to hear clearly. "Oh, come on, Lorraine. Everyone knows you were cheating on Henry at the end." The room tilted. Grant's eyebrows lifted, as if he were hearing something he'd been waiting to hear out loud. Elise looked up quickly, eyes wide with fake shock. Matthew's face tightened. "That's a lie," I whispered. Carissa shrugged. "Is it?" She leaned forward. "He told us you were distant. He told us you weren't around. He told us he didn't recognize you anymore." I felt the air leave my lungs. "He never said that. Not to me. Not once." I had spent those last 7 months practically living in the hospital. I could still smell the antiseptic in my hair. I could still feel the grooves the visitor's chair had pressed into my legs. Henry was confused. She continued smoothly. "Cancer does that. Makes people vulnerable to manipulation." She let the last word linger in the air like a bad perfume. "And you," she said, looking me up and down, "are very good at manipulating." "Enough," I said, though my voice trembled. "You don't get to talk about my marriage. Your marriage." She laughed. "Please, you married him when he was already old. We all know why." Someone shifted in their seat. Grant murmured, Come on, Carissa. But there was no conviction behind it. Elise kept studying her nails. Matthew looked like he wanted to disappear. I married him because I loved him, I said. The simplicity of the sentence sounded almost childish against the weight of the room. Teresa rolled her eyes. You loved his house. You loved his savings. You loved the way people treated you differently once you had the Keaton name. I set my bag on the floor slowly. I was with him when he died, I said. None of you were there. The truth hung in the air. Grant flinched. Elise shifted. Matthew looked away. Carissa's jaw tightened for a fraction of a second, the only crack in her smug expression. You were there, she replied, because you had to be. You didn't have anywhere else to go. I nearly laughed. Not because it was funny, because it was so wildly, painfully wrong. But before I could answer, she stepped aside from the chair, my chair, and gestured at it dramatically. You know what? She said. Fine. Take it. Sit. Let's pretend you still belong. I reached for the back of the chair, and that's when she finished, her voice dropping into a hiss. Just remember, everyone here knows what you are. I froze. What I am? I asked. She leaned closer, and I could feel the heat of her breath on my cheek. A widow, she whispered, and a suspected mistress at the same time. Quite a talent. The word hit me oddly. Mistress. They weren't just trying to paint me as a gold digger anymore. They were trying to paint me as a woman who had betrayed a dying man. My chest tightened. That's enough, Matthew said suddenly softly, but loud enough. For a second, something almost like guilt flickered across his face. But before he could say anything else, the door opened. Mr. Langford entered, carrying a thick folder and a smaller sealed envelope. Good morning, he said with the composed, neutral politeness of someone who has seen the best and worst of people in the same room. No one responded. He looked around, taking in the tension, the way I was half standing, half holding the chair, the way Carissa's eyes glowed with satisfaction. And then he frowned. Mrs. Keaton, he said, why are you standing? I opened my mouth, but Carissa answered first. She was just leaving. It was so quick, so smooth, that for a moment I wondered if she had practiced. She doesn't have any legal standing. Carissa went on. Henry was going to divorce her. He told us everything. My head snapped toward her. He never, Mr. Langford, cut in quietly, but firmly. That is not correct, Mrs. Keaton, he said, and it took me a second to realize he was addressing her, not me. Henry made no such statement to me, and I was his attorney for 15 years. Her cheeks flushed. I'm just telling you what he told the family, she said. He looked unimpressed, and I am telling you what he put in writing. Grant shifted in his seat. Look, Mr. Langford, he began, this doesn't need to be complicated. We all know Dad didn't mean to leave. Big decisions. For her. He jerked his chin toward me like I was a stain on the table. Mr. Langford turned to me instead. Mrs. Keaton, he said, this is your seat. He pulled the chair back gently and held it for me. For a second, my legs wouldn't move. Not because I didn't want to sit. Because I wasn't sure I remembered how to sit in a place I had just been told I no longer belonged. Finally, I lowered myself into the chair. Carissa let out a sharp laugh. You're seriously going along with this? She asked the attorney. After what she's done. He looked at her. What, exactly, has she done? Carissa opened her mouth, closed it. She hadn't expected to be challenged. We all know she was unfaithful, she said finally. In the end, while Dad was sick, it was the first time I had heard one of them say it directly. The rumor, the accusation, the poison. I stared at the polished table, watching my reflection tremble slightly in the wood. Then Mr. Langford did something I didn't expect. He walked around the table, pulled a small black device from his folder, and set it directly in front of me. A voice recorder before we proceed with the reading of the will, he said. His tone suddenly weightier. Henry left instructions for one specific step. The room stilled. What kind of step? Grant demanded. Mr. Langford looked at me. He asked that this be played, he said, in the presence of his wife. His eyes moved deliberately to each of the others, and his children. My heart lurched. You mean, I began. He nodded once. Henry recorded a message. 5 weeks before he passed. He asked that no one hear his will before this. Carissa's face went white. That's absurd. She rushed out. He wasn't in his right mind. He was, actually, Mr. Langford replied. His physician and a consulting psychiatrist signed off on his mental competence. The date and certification are attached. Grant stared at the recorder as if it might explode. Matthew looked at me, and for the first time that day, I saw something in his eyes that wasn't disgust or distance. I saw fear, not of me, of the truth. "Shall we begin?" Mr. Langford asked quietly. I swallowed. My fingers curled into my skirt. "Yes," I said. My voice didn't shake. He pressed play. Static crackled. Then my husband's voice filled the room. And in that moment, whatever power Carissa thought she had, whatever narrative they had prepared, whatever version of me they had rehearsed together in whispers and late-night conversations, it all began to crumble. Because the dead, after all, can still speak. And Henry had chosen his moment very carefully. The room seemed to shrink the instant Henry's voice filled the air. Not because it was loud, but because it was him. Alive again. Warm. Familiar. Unmistakably Henry. "I don't know how many of you will be sitting in this room when you hear this," the recording began. "And I don't know what version of the truth you've already chosen to believe. But I do know one thing. If you're listening to this, I'm gone." My lungs stopped working. Completely. Not in grief, in shock. Because hearing a dead man speak is not like remembering him. It is like being pulled backward through time against your will. Carissa's body stiffened beside me. Grant leaned forward slowly, as if magnetized by the voice. Elise pressed both palms flat against the table. Matthew closed his eyes. Henry continued, "I asked Mr. Langford to record this because I've spent the last 2 years watching my family fracture in silence. And I will not die without saying what I saw with my own eyes." My heart began to pound. He had seen, not what they claimed he saw, but what actually happened. "My wife, Lorraine," his voice said, steady and clear, "has been accused of many things behind closed doors, some of them by people sitting in this very room. So before my will is read, before anyone touches a single dollar of what I built, I want the truth spoken out loud." Carissa's lips parted. "No," she whispered. But Henry didn't stop. "My illness took my body," he said. "It did not take my mind. I knew who came to see me. I knew who stayed. I knew who turned away because facing death was inconvenient." Grant shifted in his seat. Matthew swallowed hard. "When the doctors told me how little time I had left," Henry continued, "my sons visited me once. My daughter visited me twice. They cried. They promised. They told me they'd handle everything after I was gone." His voice paused for half a second. "But Lorraine," he said, and his tone softened. "She never left." My vision blurred. She slept in a chair beside my bed for months. She bathed me, fed me, held the basin when I was too sick to stand. She heard my worst fears and never once pretended not to be afraid herself. Carissa stood up abruptly. "This is ridiculous," she snapped. "This proves nothing." But no one looked at her. All eyes were on the recorder. And then, Henry said, my sons began to ask questions, not about my pain, not about my prognosis, about my assets. My chest tightened. "I realized something in those final months," he continued. "Something ugly, but necessary. I was surrounded by people waiting for me to die." Grant's jaw clenched. "And one woman," Henry said, "praying selfishly that I wouldn't." The room felt like it had dropped several degrees. "I am not a fool," Henry went on. "I know how the story will be told once I'm gone. That Lorraine married me for money, that she took advantage of my age, that she manipulated a sick man." Carissa folded her arms again, but now her fingers trembled. "So let me be very clear," Henry said. "Lorraine never cheated on me, not once. The last man who touched my wife was me." The words landed like a bomb. Grant sucked in a sharp breath. Elise pressed a hand to her mouth. Matthew's face strained of color. "And the rumor of infidelity," Henry continued calmly, "originated from one voice, one calculated whisper. One woman who understood that the fastest way to erase a wife is to stain her." I felt my pulse roaring in my ears. Carissa stood perfectly still. "If you are sitting beside Lorraine right now," Henry said, "you will already know who I mean." Silence. No one moved. No one spoke. Then Henry said her name. "Carissa." The sound of it spoken by a dead man felt unnatural, predatory. Carissa's composure shattered instantly. "This is forged," she shouted. "This is sick." He was confused. That was not confusion. Mr. Langford said sharply for the first time. That was clarity. Henry's voice continued, unbothered by the chaos. "You told my sons their father was being used," he said. "You told them their inheritance was being stolen. You told them that if they didn't act quickly, Lorraine would take everything." Carissa's eyes ripped toward Matthew. "I never, and my sons believed you. Henry said calmly. Because it was easier than facing their own distance from me. Matthew broke. That's not fair, he whispered, his hands shaking. Dad, I didn't, but Henry's voice kept going. I changed my will that night, he said. Not out of rage, out of clarity. The room turned deadly quiet. Every dollar I own will go to Lorraine Keaton. The words echoed. Around. Inside. Everywhere. What? Grant exploded. That's impossible. Henry's voice continued with surgical precision. My biological children will receive nothing. Elise burst into tears. This can't be real, she sobbed. Grant slammed his palm against the table. He stole our inheritance, he roared, then corrected himself halfway through the sentence. She did. Henry's voice cut through them all. You stole from me long before I ever took from you, he said. You stole presence. You stole care. You stole truth. Carissa lunged toward the recorder. Mr. Langford caught her wrist midair. Do not, he warned. Henry went on. And finally, Lorraine is not my second wife. She is my wife. In full, in truth, in loyalty. My throat closed. So, whatever story makes you sleep at night, Henry concluded, tell it to the walls. The truth belongs to her now. The recording stopped. No dramatic music, no final words, only silence, thick, suffocating. Matthew stared at the table, as if it had betrayed him. Grant's face twisted with rage and disbelief. Elise wept quietly, and Carissa was shaking. Not crying, not screaming, shaking. It's fake, she whispered again. But this time her voice held no power. It has to be. Mr. Langford straightened his jacket. The will stands, he said. Every legal condition was met. Every amendment was properly filed. Grant shot to his feet. So what, you're just handing everything to her? He spat. The house, the business, the accounts, everything. Yes, Mr. Langford replied evenly. Carissa let out a sound between a laugh and a sob. She planned this, she said hoarsely, pointing at me. She manipulated him while he was dying. I finally stood, slowly. For the first time since I walked into that room, my body felt anchored again. You accused me, I said quietly, of loving him for what he owned. Carissa's eyes blazed. Yes, she hissed. I stepped closer. You loved him only for what he could leave you. The room held its breath. That is the difference between us. Carissa lunged forward. Grant moved with her. Everything happened at once. Matthew shouted my name. A chair scraped violently against the floor. And Carissa raised her hand. Carissa's hand rose before my mind could catch up with her body. Fingers spread. Wrist tense, that instinctive, ugly motion that women recognize even when they've never actually been hit. Because the body knows. Somewhere in my bones, something old and wordless braced itself. I didn't flinch. Not because I was brave. Because I was stunned. I was standing in a law office, with a mahogany table between us, a licensed attorney beside me, my adult children watching, and still, Carissa's first impulse in the face of losing money was to strike, not to argue, not to negotiate, to erase me physically. Her palm cut through the air toward my face. I saw, in one frozen second, the white crescent of her manicured nails, the glitter of the diamond bracelet she'd been flaunting all morning. The wildness in her eyes, that desperate, cornered look predators get when they realize the trap was never for you, it was for them. Hey, Matthew shouted. His chair scraped violently backward. Time snapped back into motion. He moved faster than she did. His hand shot out and caught her wrist midair, fingers gripping so hard her skin blanched beneath them. The impact never landed. The sound that filled the room was not a slap. It was the choked gasp Carissa let out when her arm stopped inches from my cheek. Are you insane? Matthew hissed. His voice cracked on the last word. For the first time that morning, he looked like my son again, not the embarrassed stranger by the window, but the boy who once stood in front of me on a playground when another kid shoved me, saying, "Don't push my mom." Carissa tried to yank her arm back. "Let go of me," she snapped. "She deserves," Mr. Langford's voice cut across hers like a blade. "That is enough." It wasn't loud, but it was final. He stepped between us, his body blocking her from me, his eyes hard in a way I hadn't seen before. "Mrs. Keaton," he said to her, and I realized, with a small, bitter flash of irony, that everyone kept calling her by my name. "You will lower your hand, sit down, and conduct yourself as an adult, or I will have security remove you, and we will proceed without your presence." Carissa's nostrils flared. "You can't, I can," he replied calmly. "And I will." Matthew released her wrist. She pulled back, shaking her arm out as if he'd burned her. For a second, I thought she might try again, that the fury boiling under her skin would overpower even the fear of consequences. But she didn't. She straightened her blouse, smoothed her hair, and gave me a look that I had seen only once before, the day Henry and I told his children we were getting married. Back then, the hostility had been cooler, sharper, wrapped in polite words and tight smiles, but the core of it was the same. You're trespassing. You're stealing something that should have been mine. She lowered herself slowly into the chair. Elise sniffled beside her, mascara smudging under her eyes. Grant was still standing, chest heaving, as if he were choosing between punching a wall and flipping the table. I became aware, faintly, of movement at the doorway. A young woman from the front desk stood there, half hidden behind the frame, eyes wide. Her phone was in her hand, screen lit, as if she'd come to call someone and then frozen, unsure whether she was allowed to witness whatever this was. Her gaze met mine for a flicker of a second. She looked away quickly. The air tasted like metal. I lifted my hand to my face, the one Carissa almost struck, and let my fingers hover over the space where her palm had aimed. It was an odd sensation, feeling pain where pain had never quite landed. "Are you all right, Mrs. Keaton?" Mr. Langford asked me. I realized he meant me, not her, and something inside my chest loosened by a fraction. "Yes," I said. My voice came out rough, but steady. "I'm fine." That was not true, but it was the only answer I could give without crumbling. He studied me for a moment, then nodded. "Do you wish to continue?" he asked. His question was more than legal. It was something else. "Do you wish to stay seated at this table? Do you wish to claim the place they are trying to tear from you? Do you wish to remain present in your own life?" I thought of the months in the hospital, of watching Henry's body shrink under white sheets, of counting the hiss of the oxygen machine, instead of counting sheep at night, of whispering prayers I wasn't even sure reached anything beyond the ceiling tiles. I thought of the days after the funeral, when the casseroles stopped coming, and the phone stopped ringing, and the quiet grew teeth. I thought of every time I had been told, in polite and not so polite ways, that I was lucky to have married a man like Henry, as if I'd won him in a raffle and hadn't spent 2 decades caring for him, laughing with him, surviving heartbreaks and successes and disappointments together. I thought of the way his voice had sounded on that recorder. "Lorraine never cheated on me. The last man who touched my wife was me." I took a breath. "Yes," I said again, more firmly. "We continue." Grant laughed. It was an ugly, disbelieving sound. "Of course she wants to continue," he muttered. "She's just been handed a free ticket to a life she didn't earn." "Watch your words, Mr. Keaton," Mr. Langford warned. But I didn't need him to defend me. Not anymore. I turned my head slowly and looked at Grant, really looked at him. He had Henry's height, Henry's shoulders, Henry's tendency to clench his jaw when he felt cornered. But he did not have Henry's eyes. Henry's eyes softened when he loved someone. Grant's only hardened. "You think I didn't earn it?" I asked quietly. He scoffed. "You were a waitress when he met you," he said. "You were living in a 2-bedroom apartment over a laundromat. Now you're sitting here in his pearls and his last name, acting like you built any of this." Memories rose, unbidden. The smell of fryer oil in my hair, the hiss of the grill, the clatter of plates, Henry walking in late on a Tuesday night, tired from a business trip, loosening his tie as he slid into a booth and ordered coffee instead of whiskey because he had a meeting in the morning. The way he'd watched me move between tables, not with hunger, not with entitlement, but with something like curiosity. "You're right," I said softly. Grant blinked. "What?" "You're right," I repeated. "I didn't build the company. I didn't sign the contracts. I didn't make the investments." I paused. "But I did build the life that kept your father alive long enough to make any of it matter." The words surprised even me. I hadn't planned them. They arrived fully formed, as if they'd been waiting at the back of my throat for years, finally given permission to step into the light. Grant opened his mouth, closed it. Matthew sank back into his chair slowly, rubbing his fingers over his forehead like he had a headache that had been building long before this morning. Carissa exhaled sharply, as if bored. "Can we skip the poor widow monologue?" she said. "We all know how this ends. She gets everything. We get nothing. Dad's gone. The lawyer gets paid. Great story. Can we go home now?" "No," Mr. Langford said. "Just that. One syllable." But it landed with weight. Carissa rolled her eyes. "Why not?" she snapped. "You said it yourself. The will stands. You read the little speech, the dead man's message played, drama over. There are still formalities, he replied, rights to be explained, documents to be signed. And he glanced at me, then at the folder still lying unopened beside the recorder. There are additional provisions. Something inside me went very still. Additional, Elise echoed, her voice small. Yes, he said. Henry added a sealed letter to his file, to be delivered to his wife upon his passing, in the presence of his children. The words landed like the softest, sharpest of knives. His wife, his children, no mention of in-laws, no mention of second wives, just wife. My stomach dropped. He wrote a letter, I asked, to me, to us, to who I had been beside him in those final months. Yes, Mr. Langford confirmed. He requested that I wait until after the audio recording and the initial reading of the primary clause. He was very specific. Carissa laughed again, but it sounded thinner now. I'm sure it's another performance, she said. A love letter from beyond the grave, confirming his eternal devotion to Saint Lorraine. Her sarcasm slid over me without sinking in, because all I could think was his handwriting. I hadn't seen it since the day I signed the last hospital consent form, and he'd squeezed my fingers weakly and whispered, "You read it for me. I trust you more than I trust my own eyes now." Grief moved through me, sharp and sudden, like a wave that hadn't gotten the memo that we were busy being angry at the moment. "Do you want to hear it now?" Mr. Langford asked me quietly. I realized everyone was looking at me again, waiting, expecting. The woman they had tried to cast out of the room now held the only key to whatever came next. I thought of saying no, of asking him to mail it, of reading it alone, at my kitchen table with a cup of lukewarm tea and nobody watching my face when his words cut into me. But that was the old habit speaking, the habit of protecting everybody from my pain, the habit of crying where nobody could see. Henry had chosen this. He wanted it read here, in this room, in front of the people who had rewritten our story without my consent. I straightened my back. "Yes," I said. "Read it." Mr. Langford opened the folder with the same care I'd seen nurses use when unwrapping sterile instruments. He pulled out a smaller envelope, cream-colored, with my name written across the front. Lorraine, not Mrs. Keaton. Not to whom it may concern, just my name, in Henry's slightly slanted script. I felt my throat tighten. I had fallen in love with that handwriting over grocery lists and post-it notes on the fridge, over napkins at diners and sticky notes on the bathroom mirror. "Call the dentist. Pick up more coffee. You looked beautiful this morning." All those little scraps of ordinary. This was not ordinary. "This is in his handwriting," Mr. Langford said, "mostly for the record. Dated the same day as the audio. Witnessed by myself and my paralegal. For clarity, I will read it aloud, as requested." He broke the seal. The sound of paper tearing seemed louder than Carissa's almost slap. He unfolded the single sheet inside. Silence settled over the room again. Not the oppressive kind from the beginning of the morning. A new kind, expectant, waited with the knowledge that whatever he read next would shift something permanently. He began. "Lorraine," he read, "if you're hearing this, I am not beside you. And for that, I am sorrier than I have ever been about anything in my life." Something inside me cracked. His voice, his words, not through a speaker now, through ink, through the shape of every letter, the pressure of every stroke. "I know you," the letter went on. "You are probably sitting there, trying not to cry because you don't want to give anyone the satisfaction. You are probably telling yourself not to make a scene, not to be dramatic." A shaky breath left my chest. He knew me even now. "So I am going to ask you, Mr. Langford continued, for the first and only time in our marriage, to do the opposite of what you always do." I frowned. "What?" "I am asking you," Henry had written, "to stop shrinking." The room blurred for a second. "My children have spent years pretending you were temporary," the letter said. "They comforted themselves with the idea that they could outlast you, that you were a phase, an interruption, a mistake their father would one day correct." Matthew's shoulders hunched inward. Grant's jaw tightened. Elise wiped at her eyes, smearing tears across her cheeks. "But you were never a phase, Lorraine," the letter continued. "You were the one thing I did right when everything else in my life was louder than my own heart." I closed my eyes. The sound of Henry's breathing in the hospital, the way his hand searched for mine in the dark, the way he'd whisper, "Stay," even when I was just getting up to go to the bathroom. "They will tell you that you don't belong," the letter said. They will try to rearrange rooms so you have no chair. They will rewrite conversations so you have no voice. They will spread lies so you have no dignity. I opened my eyes. Carissa was staring at the letter as if she could set it on fire with her mind. Do not hand them the matches, Henry had written. Do not put yourself out for them. Not this time. A sound escaped my throat. Not quite a laugh, not quite a sob. I am leaving you everything, the letter said. Not because you asked. You never did. Not once. I am leaving you everything because they already took what mattered most. Time. Time they did not spend. Time they did not share. Time they did not want to give. Grant looked like he'd been slapped. This time, the blow landed. What I am giving them now is the truth, Henry wrote. What I am giving you is the ability to decide your life without their hands on your throat. My fingers curled into fists in my lap. You do not owe them a single inch of ground, Lorraine, the letter said. If they scream, remember, they had every chance to speak when I was still able to listen. If they cry, remember they never wiped your tears when you came home from the hospital, bone-tired. If they accuse you, remember they are really accusing themselves. Do not let their guilt rent space in your mind. Tears burned behind my eyes. I blinked them back, just barely. If you want to keep the house, Henry had written, keep it. If you want to sell everything and move somewhere they will never find you, sell it. If you want to turn my office into a dance studio and waltz alone in the evenings, do it. I will not be there to laugh, but I promise I will not haunt you either. I want you free. There it was, the word I hadn't allowed myself to even imagine. Free. Most of all, the letter said, I want you to stop apologizing for existing. A silence followed that sentence that felt like someone had opened a window in the room. New air, cold, but clean. You were not the mistake in my life, Henry concluded. You were the correction. You were the miracle I almost missed. Please, for whatever time you have left, live like you believe that. I chose you. I choose you still, with love, Henry. Mr. Langford's voice faltered just slightly on the last word. He cleared his throat, folded the paper carefully, slipped it back into the envelope and set it in front of me. My name stared up at me in Henry's handwriting. Lorraine. I reached out with a hand that didn't feel like mine and placed my fingers over the letters. They were dry and flat, and yet somehow I felt as if I were touching his palm. For a long moment, no one spoke. Then Grant exploded. This is unbelievable, he shouted, shoving his chair back so hard it nearly toppled. He was manipulated. This is brainwashing. She got in his head while he was sick. He pointed at me, his arm shaking. She did this. She made him turn against his own blood. She made him hate us. Hate. The word slammed into me. Henry and hate did not belong in the same sentence. Enough, Mr. Langford said again. No, Grant roared. You can't just sit there and pretend this is fair. She's a stranger who poured his soup and warmed his bed, and now she gets everything my mother was supposed to have. Your mother divorced him, I said quietly. The words left my mouth before I could soften them. Grant's head whipped toward me. What did you say? Your mother divorced him? I repeated, my voice steady. She left. She broke that life. He built another one. With me. You don't have to like it. You never did. But you don't get to erase it. His face went red. For a second I thought he might cross the room. He took one step forward. Another. He was taller than me, broader, his anger filling the space like a storm. Matthew moved again, half-raising hand out. Grant, don't, he warned. Elise sobbed. Please, just stop. You're scaring me. The front desk girl in the doorway lifted her phone. This time, there was no doubt. The camera was on. I saw the little red light. Grant noticed too. He stopped, breathing hard. His knuckles were white. He looked at the phone, then at me, then at the envelope in front of me. You're not going to get away with this, he said. His voice was lower now, more dangerous, because it was quieter. This isn't over. He wasn't just talking about the will. He was talking about something else. Court, public opinion, humiliation, vengeance. I felt the shape of the future shifting, not toward relief, but toward a new kind of battlefield. No, I said softly. My own voice surprised me. Everyone looked at me, even the girl with the phone. You're right, I said. This isn't over. I ran my thumb along the edge of the envelope, feeling the slight sting of paper against skin. But the part where you get to decide who I am, I added, that part is, for a brief, suspended second, Something flickered in Matthew's eyes. Respect, fear, recognition. Maybe all three. He looked at his brother, at his sister, at his wife, then back at me. Mom, he said, just that, one word. So small, so familiar, so late. The hand Carissa had raised at the beginning of the chapter had never landed on my face, but something else had. Henry's words, they didn't bruise the skin. They did something far more dangerous. They woke me up. I straightened in my chair, the chair they had tried to erase, and folded my hands calmly on the table. Shall we finish? I asked Mr. Langford. My voice no longer trembled, and for the first time since I married into the Keaton family, I did not feel like a guest at their table. I felt like the host. Years later, when people would talk about that day, because people always talk, they would say, the shocking moment was when Henry's voice declared that everything belonged to me. But that wasn't it. The real shock wasn't the money. It wasn't the house. It wasn't the accounts. The real shock was that, for the first time in my life, I stopped trying to earn a place that had already been given to me. And once a woman stops apologizing for breathing, there is very little anyone can do to banish her. The meeting didn't end with the slam of a gavel. It ended with silence. Not the heavy, ominous silence from before, but the hollow kind that follows an explosion. When everyone is too stunned to gather the debris, Mr. Langford began collecting documents with slow, deliberate movements. Grant stood rigid, breathing through his nose like a cornered animal. Elise cried openly now, her face buried in her hands. Matthew remained seated, frozen in place, staring at the table as if the wood might open and swallow him. And Carissa, she watched me. Not with rage, not yet, with calculation. The kind of look that measures distance, weakness, openings. The kind that says, this round is over, but the war just started. Mr. Langford broke the stillness first. This meeting is formally adjourned, he said. My office will contact each of you regarding further legal procedures. Until then, I advise everyone to refrain from harassment, public accusations, or property interference. Grant gave a humorless laugh. Are you threatening us now? I am stating the law, Mr. Langford replied evenly. Whether you experience that as a threat is not my concern. Carissa stood abruptly, grabbing her purse. This is a joke, she said coldly. And when it's corrected, I'll make sure she regrets every second of this little performance. She brushed past me, her shoulder clipped mine, not hard, just enough. A private message delivered in passing. I am not done with you. Matthew finally stood. Carissa, she didn't stop. Grant followed her out without another word. Elise hesitated, looking between me and her brother, eyes red and bewildered. For half a second, I thought she might speak. She didn't. She turned and ran after them. The door shut. The room exhaled. Mr. Langford turned to me. Do you have someone you'd like me to call to drive you home? He asked gently. The question startled me. Someone to drive me, someone to hold my arm, someone to buffer the world. I realized, with quiet clarity, that no such person existed anymore. I drove myself, I said. He nodded. Then I'll have my assistant walk you to the car. That won't be necessary, I replied. He studied me. You handled that better than most people would. I looked down at Henry's letter still resting on the table. I'm not most people anymore, I said. The hallway outside the conference room felt longer than before. The carpet absorbed my footsteps. The walls reflected a stranger's face, pale, composed, eyes darker than they had ever been. The receptionist stood stiffly behind the desk, pretending not to stare. The young woman who had filmed earlier lingered near the copy machine, phone tightly clenched in her hand. Our eyes met. For an instant, I saw something there that wasn't curiosity. It was recognition, not pity, recognition. The elevator doors slid open with a soft chime. I stepped inside alone. As the doors closed, I caught my reflection again in the mirrored panel. For a moment, I didn't recognize the woman looking back at me, not because she looked stronger, but because she looked awake. The parking garage was cool and dim. My car sat exactly where I'd left it, ordinary, faithful. I unlocked the door and sat behind the wheel. For several seconds, I didn't turn the key. The silence was deafening now. No lawyer, no enemies, no recorder playing a dead man's truth. Just me, and everything that had just shattered. My hands began to shake. Not violently, not dramatically, just enough. I rested my forehead against the steering wheel, breathed once, twice. The tears came then, quiet, hot, unapologetic, not the sobbing kind. The flooding kind. 22 years. 22 years collapsed into one moment in a legal office with a missing chair. I'm still here, I whispered to no one. And for the first time since Henry died, I truly meant it. I didn't drive home, not to that house, the one filled with his shoes by the door, his coffee mug by the sink, his jacket still hanging where he left it. I drove past, turned, and kept going until the city thinned and the road opened into quiet neighborhoods with wide lawns and slow afternoons. I parked near a small park I used to pass years ago on my way to work, back when I was a waitress, back when my life belonged to me. I got out of the car and sat on a bench beneath a maple tree. Children played on swings. A woman jogged past with headphones in. A man walked his dog. Life continued. Indifferent to inheritance. Indifferent to betrayal. Indifferent to me. And somehow, that was comforting. My phone vibrated, once, then again. Matthew. I didn't answer. It buzzed again, and again. Then stopped. A minute later, a new vibration. Unknown number. I knew who it was before I even looked. Carissa. I stared at the screen until it went dark. Another message arrived. Grant. Then, Elise finally. A text from Matthew. Mom, please, we need to talk. I turned the phone face down on the bench beside me. For the first time in my life, I chose silence, not as a shield, as a boundary. That night, when I finally returned to the house, the lights were still off. The neighborhood was quiet. Too quiet, I unlocked the door. Something felt wrong immediately. Not broken, not disturbed, just touched. The faintest shift in the air. I set my purse down slowly and walked into the living room. The first thing I noticed was the photo frame. Henry and me at the lake. It used to sit on the side table. Now it was face down. My chest tightened. I moved farther inside. The bedroom door was slightly open. It had been closed when I left. The room smelled faintly of unfamiliar perfume. Something sweet, sharp. I stepped closer. My jewelry box was open. Not emptied, just opened. Rifled through. Nothing large was missing. Nothing obvious. But the message was clear. I can enter your life whenever I want. I sat on the edge of the bed slowly. Not in fear, in understanding. They hadn't accepted the loss. They had only changed weapons. I checked the locks that night. Every one. I closed the curtains. I turned off the lights. And for the first time since Henry's death, I did not sleep with his side of the bed untouched. I lay in the center, claiming space. Across town, Carissa sat in the passenger seat of Grant's car, jaw tight. She's not smarter than us, she snapped. She's just old and lucky. Grant drove in silence, knuckles white on the wheel. We should have stopped that recording, Elise whispered from the back seat, still shaken. No, Carissa said sharply. We should have destroyed her before it played. Grant finally spoke. This doesn't end in court, he said. Carissa turned to him. A slow, dangerous smile spread across her lips. No, she agreed. It ends in reputation. The article didn't use my name at first, not directly. It never does. It said, sources close to the Keaton family reveal shocking details about the late businessman's final months. I found it the next morning when my phone began vibrating on the kitchen counter, before I'd even poured my coffee. Once, twice, again. I ignored the first 3 calls, answered the 4th. Lorraine, a woman's voice said, breathless. Tell me this isn't true. Tell you what? I asked. There was a pause. Then she read, they're saying you were having an affair while Henry was dying. The mug slipped from my hand and shattered against the tile. Coffee spread across the floor like a dark stain. I still couldn't feel it. Where? I whispered. She sent the link. It took less than 10 minutes for the lie to go everywhere. Local news sites, celebrity gossip pages, Facebook groups, comments multiplying faster than comprehension. Business tycoon betrayed in his final days. Insider claims widow accused of secret affair as family loses inheritance. Was Lorraine Keaton a gold digger? Or worse, the words blurred together into one long accusation. I scrolled. People I had never met had opinions about my body, my morals, my marriage, my motives. They called me a slut, a predator, a parasite, a saint who fooled everyone. They debated whether I was smart or evil. No one debated whether I was human. My phone rang again. Matthew? I didn't answer. Another call. Grant, then Elise, then an unknown number. A reporter. It didn't matter. The damage was already done. By noon, someone had posted a photo of the house, my house. The caption read, This is where the faithful widow lives. Comments filled with laughing emojis and accusations. I closed the app. My hands were steady now. The shock was gone. Something colder had taken its place. At 3 in the afternoon, the doorbell rang. I didn't answer. It rang again. Longer this time. I walked slowly to the front window and pulled the curtain back an inch. 2 women. A camera. A microphone. Press. I stepped out onto the porch before they could ring again. Their faces lit up. "Mrs. Keaton, I have nothing to say," I said calmly. "You're being accused of betraying your husband during his final illness," one of them said quickly. "Do you deny that?" "Yes," I replied. A pause. That single word threw her off. No story, no defense, no emotion, just truth. "Yes, I deny it." "Then why would multiple family members?" "You'll have to ask them why they're lying," I said. They exchanged a glance. "Are you willing to provide proof?" I smiled faintly. My husband already did. I closed the door. Inside my own home, I felt watched, not physically, socially. Like the walls had thinned and everything inside me had been dragged into daylight without consent. The phone rang all evening. Some calls were silent, some were cruel, some were confused. One woman left a voicemail saying, "My sister went through this too. Don't let them bury you." I sat on the kitchen floor listening to it again and again. Across town, Carissa watched the news on mute, her wineglass untouched. "It's spreading faster than I expected," Elise said nervously. Carissa smiled. "People love to believe the worst about women who inherit power." Grant leaned against the counter. "And if she fights back?" Carissa finally lifted her glass. "She won't," she said calmly. "She's a caretaker. They aren't built to go to war." She was wrong. I just hadn't picked up my weapons yet. That night, Matthew showed up at the door. I saw him through the peephole, hands empty, face drawn. I opened the door but didn't step aside. "Mom," he said quietly, "we didn't plan this." "No," I said. "You just fed it." He flinched. "You have to know Carissa." "I know exactly who Carissa is," I replied. He swallowed. "They're going to destroy you socially. This is bigger than the will now." I nodded. "Yes," I said. "That's the point." He looked at me, confused. "They need the world to think I'm dirt," I continued. "Because if the world believes I'm dirt, then they don't have to face what they did to their father." Matthew's eyes filled. "For what it's worth," he whispered, "I believe you." I studied him. "Too late is still late, but it is not nothing." "Then be careful," I said. "Belief has consequences now." He left without another word. Later that night, as I lay in bed, my phone lit up with one final message from Charissa. "You could have walked away quietly. You chose humiliation." I typed back only one line. "No, you chose exposure." 3 dots appeared, then vanished. She never replied. The first person who challenged the story wasn't a lawyer. It wasn't a friend. It wasn't even someone who liked me. It was a woman who had once hated me. Her name was Diane Morell. I hadn't spoken to her in nearly 15 years. The message appeared on my phone just after 7 in the morning, while I stood at the sink washing a plate I had already washed twice. "This is Diane. If you remember me, I don't believe a word they're saying about you, and I think you're in danger." I stared at the screen. Of all people, Diane Morell, Henry's former business partner's wife, the woman who, for years, had looked at me like I was the reason their marriage fell apart, which I wasn't, but perception rarely asks permission from truth. I typed, "Why would you help me?" The response came almost immediately. "Because they tried this with me first." A chill slid down my spine. We met that afternoon in a quiet cafe on the edge of town, the kind no reporters frequented because no one famous had ever eaten there. Diane looked older. So did I. Time had done its quiet work on both of us. She didn't hug me. She didn't smile. She slid a folder across the table and said only, "They always followed the same pattern." Inside the folder were screenshots, messages, emails, voice transcriptions, all from different women, all with the same accusation: affair, manipulation, inheritance theft, family betrayal. "Your stepdaughter-in-law," Diane said calmly, stirring her tea, "has been planting stories for years, quietly, carefully. A rumor here, a whisper there. She doesn't need everyone to believe the lie, only enough people to make the truth drown." My throat tightened. "How many?" I asked. Diane exhaled. "5 women before you, that I could trace." My hands trembled as I flipped through the pages. Different names, different families, same ending. Widow isolated, disinherited relatives portrayed as victims, public humiliation, social exile. She benefits when chaos breaks a family apart, Diane continued. Sometimes financially, sometimes strategically, sometimes just emotionally. Why didn't anyone stop her? I whispered. Diane finally looked at me. With what proof? The cafe felt suddenly too small to contain what was unfolding. She almost destroyed my marriage, Diane said. I stayed silent because my husband begged me to. For the sake of peace, for the sake of business. Her jaw tightened. The business survived, she continued. Our marriage didn't. I closed my eyes. Another family buried alive by silence. What do you want from me? I asked. Diane held my gaze. To end it. That night, my phone rang again. Unknown number. I nearly didn't answer. Mrs. Keaton. A calm female voice asked. My name is Paula Ortega. I represent Diane Morel. My chest tightened. She believes you're being targeted by a coordinated defamation strategy, the lawyer continued. And she's prepared to testify to that effect. Testify. The word rang in my ears. Publicly. On record. This could get very ugly, Paula added. For everyone involved. I thought of Carissa's smile. I'm already there, I said. Across town, Carissa paced her living room, phone pressed to her ear. They're saying Diane Morel is talking, Elise whispered nervously. Carissa stopped pacing. Her smile did not reach her eyes. That woman never learned when to stay quiet, she said. Is this going to become a lawsuit? Grant asked. Carissa's eyes gleamed. No, she replied softly. It's going to become a spectacle. The following morning, the headline changed. Former insider challenges affair allegations in Keaton scandal. My name was still in bold. But next to it was something new. Doubt, and doubt, once planted, spreads faster than lies. For the first time since Henry's death, I felt the balance shift. Not toward victory, but away from isolation. And that was enough to keep breathing. The subpoena arrived on a Tuesday. Not by email, not by text, by hand. A uniformed officer stood on my porch at exactly 9 in the morning. His posture was neutral, his voice professional, his eyes careful, the kind of careful that means someone powerful is involved. Lorraine Keaton, he asked. Yes, you've been named in a civil action for defamation, fraud, and emotional distress, he said. You've also been named as a key witness in a countersuit. My stomach dropped. Against who? I asked. He glanced at the papers. Carissa Keaton. For a moment, the world seemed to tilt sideways. She had truly done it. She had chosen the one battlefield that could bring everything into the open. Court, the officer handed me the documents. Dates on the front page, he said. You'll need legal representation. I almost laughed. I think I already have that, I said. Mr. Langford didn't smile when I placed the papers on his desk, which told me everything I needed to know. This is aggressive, he said quietly. She's accusing you of orchestrating an inheritance fraud, manipulating Henry's mental state, and deliberately sabotaging the family's reputation. And the countersuit? I asked. He slid another document toward me. Filed this morning, he said. On your behalf. Coordinated defamation, conspiracy, harassment, invasion of privacy, and attempted assault on recorded premises. Attempted assault, the almost slap. They had it on film. The young woman at the office had sent the footage anonymously 3 nights earlier. I had watched it once, only once. It was enough. What happens now? I asked. Langford laced his fingers. Now the lie goes on trial. By evening, the news had exploded again. Keaton widow sues stepdaughter-in-law in defamation battle. Viral law office video under review by prosecutors. Family scandal turns into courtroom war. The comments were vicious, but different now. Divided. Half the public still wanted blood. The other half wanted truth. Carissa had wanted a spectacle. She got one. Matthew came to the house that night. Again. This time, I didn't hesitate before opening the door. He looked exhausted. I tried to stop her. He said, Did you? I asked. He closed his eyes. Not hard enough. Silence sat between us, heavy, regret-colored. Why are you here? I asked. He pulled out his phone. Because she crossed the line. He said, and I think you should see what she's planning next. He handed me the phone, a voice message. Carissa's voice, clear, cold, calculated. If the court doesn't bury her, the internet will. And if the internet doesn't, then we'll make her life so small she'll disappear on her own. My fingers tightened around the phone. You recorded her? I asked. He nodded once. She doesn't know. I looked at him, truly looked at him. For the first time in months, I didn't see a coward. I saw a fracture in his allegiance. Why give this to me? I asked. His voice broke. Because he would have wanted me to. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. Then I said quietly, if you walk this road with me now, there is no going back. He met my eyes. I already turned back once, he said. It cost me my father. Across town, Carissa's confidence began to crack. The video had gone public. Her raised hand, her twisted face, her husband's grip around her wrist. People noticed things they hadn't wanted to notice before. The cruelty in her movements, the absence of shame. Sponsors pulled back. Associates went quiet. And for the first time in her life, she was no longer controlling the narrative. 2 days later, the first deposition was scheduled. I sat in a beige room with bland art on the walls and a recorder on the table, a cruel echo of Henry's voice recorder at the will reading. Across from me sat Carissa. Perfect makeup, perfect posture, perfect hatred. Her lawyer began. When did you first meet Henry Keaton? I answered calmly. When I served him coffee at the Larkspur Diner, 12 years ago. And when did you begin your romantic relationship? 6 months after his divorce. Were you aware of his financial status at the time? Yes. Did that influence your decision to pursue him? No. Carissa watched every word I spoke, counting, measuring, waiting. Then her lawyer leaned forward. Mrs. Keaton, he said, did you or did you not engage in a sexual relationship with another man during your husband's final year of life? Silence. The room stilled. This was the core of everything. The blade. No, I said. No man touched me during that year. I continued. Except my dying husband, and the doctors who tried to save him. Carissa laughed softly, mocking, contemptuous. Her lawyer smiled thinly. We'll see what the evidence says. So will I replied. That night, Diane Morell called me. They're panicking, she said. They've started calling in favors. From who? I asked. Diane hesitated. People you don't want to owe things to. The war had just entered a darker phase. The evidence didn't come from a lawyer. It came from a man I had never met. His name was Isaac Bell. He was Henry's former driver. For 3 years, he had taken Henry to hospital appointments, business lunches, quiet drives along the lake when the pain got too loud to stay inside the house. He called me at 11:47 on a Thursday night. I didn't want to get involved, he said without greeting. But I saw your name on the news again tonight. My stomach tightened, and I asked, and I can't sleep anymore. We met the next morning in a cramped office behind a mechanic shop. It smelled like oil and old paper. Isaac was in his early 50s, thin, nervous, hands that wouldn't stop moving. He placed a small black flash drive between us on the table. I recorded everything, he said. I blinked. Everything. Every ride. Every conversation. Every time they thought no one else was listening. My breath caught. Why? I whispered. He swallowed. Because when someone knows they're dying, they say things people should not be allowed to erase. Mr. Langford didn't speak for 5 full minutes after listening to the first audio file. Only when it ended did he look up. This, he said quietly, will end her. The first recording was dated 11 months before Henry died. Carissa's voice filled the room. Clear, confident, unafraid. You need to stop protecting her, she said. Your sons feel abandoned. They think she's replacing them. Henry's voice followed, strained but firm. She isn't replacing anyone. She is my wife, Carissa scoffed. She's positioning herself. You're old, Henry. You don't see the game being played around you. A pause. Then Henry, the only game I see is you trying to make me distrust the only person who hasn't left me. I covered my mouth with my hand. The second recording came from 3 months later. Henry sounded weaker, breathier. Carissa sounded stronger than ever. If you don't fix this now, she said, your children will lose everything. Henry coughed. They're not entitled to everything. Carissa's tone sharpened. Then she is manipulating you. Henry's voice went low. That word again, he said. You use it so easily, like you need it, to justify something. Silence. Then Carissa. People like her don't marry for love. The file ended. I could barely breathe. The third recording destroyed any illusion left. Carissa's voice was angry now. If I have to ruin her publicly to protect what belongs to this family, I will. Henry spoke with a calm I had never heard from him before. An inheritance protects nothing, he said. It only reveals who people already are. Carissa laughed. then prepare to see who she really is. The recording cut. The room was dead silent. I was shaking, not from fear, from clarity. They plotted this long before your illness worsened, Mr. Langford said. This wasn't grief. This was strategy. What about the affair? I asked. Isaac pulled out his phone. I have that too. The final recording was taken the night before Henry entered hospice. His voice was barely above a whisper. Carissa's was sharp with impatience. Did she go anywhere today? Henry replied weakly. She went to the pharmacy. Carissa exhaled hard. Or Henry paused. Why are you obsessed with proving she isn't here? Carissa did not answer. Silence. Then Henry spoke again. You want her gone before I am? Carissa whispered. Yes. That single word collapsed the entire lie. The next court filing became a bomb. Illegal recordings revealed premeditated defamation scheme. Carissa's lawyers scrambled. Emergency injunctions failed. The judge ordered full analysis. Her confidence evaporated in real time. The next deposition was different. Carissa entered 10 minutes late, her face pale, her eyes no longer arrogant, her hands trembling beneath the table. Did you threaten to destroy Mrs. Keaton's reputation? The prosecutor asked. No, she said. The recording played. Her own voice echoed. If I have to ruin her publicly. Carissa closed her eyes. The room exploded. Her lawyer objected. Too late. The truth had already spoken. Again, outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed. For the first time in weeks, the questions were not about me. They were about her. Did you fabricate the affair story? Did you manipulate the Keaton children? Were you financially motivated? Carissa did not answer. She was escorted out through a side door. Before she disappeared, she turned and looked directly at me. For a moment, the mask was gone. No charm, no control, only terror. That night, Matthew sat beside me in silence. I let her inside our family, he said. You didn't invite the fire, I replied. You just didn't pull the extinguisher soon enough. He nodded, tears finally falling. But the war wasn't over. Carissa had lost the narrative. She had not yet lost the game, and that made her dangerous. It happened in broad daylight, not in a courtroom, not in the shadows, not behind closed doors. It happened in the parking lot of a grocery store, because violence always chooses the most ordinary places to reveal itself. I hadn't planned to go out that morning, but the fridge was empty, my head was aching, and for the first time in weeks the sky looked normal, not stormy, not heavy, just blue. I told myself that was enough reason to pretend I was a normal woman for 30 minutes. The store was busy, parents with children, elderly couples arguing gently over vegetables, music playing too softly through ceiling speakers. I was in the bread aisle when I felt it. That shift in the air. The instinct that says, you are no longer alone. I turned. Grant was standing at the end of the aisle, hands empty, jaw tight, eyes fixed on me with something raw and coiled behind them. For a moment, we simply stared at each other. What are you doing here? He asked. His voice was low, controlled. That made it worse. Buying bread, I said calmly. He stepped closer. One slow step, then another. You destroyed my family, I inhaled. No, I said. Your father told the truth. That's not destruction. That's exposure. The word snapped something inside him. You took everything, he growled. You took our name, our money, our dignity. I almost pitied him. Almost. You gave up your dignity long before the will, I said quietly. You just never noticed when. Shoppers began to slow, eyes lifting, bodies angling toward sound. Grant's hands clenched, his face changed. That was the moment I knew. This was no longer rage, this was intent. You should have stayed quiet, he said. Then he lunged. The impact threw me backward into a display of canned soup. Metal exploded around me. Pain burst through my shoulder. I screamed, not from fear, but from shock. Grant grabbed my arm and yanked me upright. His grip was iron, his face inches from mine. You think the law can protect you? He hissed. You think dead men can? I struggled. Shoppers shouted. Someone dropped a basket. A woman screamed. And then Grant raised his fist. Not to threaten this time. To strike. That's when the phones went up. Not one, not two, dozens. Screens lighting up, red dots blinking. Live, the modern version of witnesses. Grant, stop. I heard Matthew's voice. He was running toward us from the entrance. Grant's fist hesitated in the air. For half a second, I saw the war inside his eyes. Brother, son, Criminal then he chose. His arm came down. It never reached my face. Not because he changed his mind, because someone tackled him from behind. Pard Grant hit the floor with a sound that knocked the air out of both of us. McKenna, the 20-year-old cashier from aisle 3. Small, shaking, brave. Security swarmed. Shoppers shouted. Phones kept recording. Grant tried to rise. Hands pinned him down. Police were called. Sirens grew. Matthew dropped to his knees beside me. "Mom," he whispered, hands trembling as he touched my face. "Oh God, Mama, you okay?" I was shaking now. Violently. Not from pain. From the realization that my son had almost become my executioner. "I'm here," I said weakly. "I'm still here." Grant screamed from the floor. "This isn't fair," he roared. "She ruined us. She planned this." The phones captured every word. The sirens echoed into the lot. Police rushed in. Cuffs clicked. Grant was dragged up, thrashing. As he was pulled away, he twisted his head toward me. His eyes were wild, broken. "I should have finished it," he shouted. The words crashed into the crowd, into the internet, into history. That night, the video was everywhere. Not courtroom footage, not edited sound bites. Raw, shaking, human. Businessman's son attacks widow in public meltdown. Viral video shows brutal confrontation. "I should have finished," IT suspect yells as he's arrested. The narrative collapsed, completely, overnight. Grant was charged with assault, attempted aggravated battery, threatening a witness, public endangerment, and because of the prior recordings, conspiracy was added. Matthew sat beside me on the couch that night, silent. "I didn't recognize him," he whispered. I leaned my head against the back of the sofa. "I didn't recognize any of you," I said. "Until now," he cried. Not loudly, not for show, but with his face buried in his hands like a child who had watched his world fall in pieces and realized he had helped hold the hammer. Across town, Carissa watched the footage on repeat, Grant being dragged away, her plans bleeding out on concrete and sirens, her reflection in the black TV screen. For the first time, she looked afraid. "This wasn't supposed to happen." Elise trembled. "No," Carissa said softly. "This is exactly what happens when pawns think they're kings." Her phone vibrated. Message from her lawyer: "We've lost control of the case. Prosecutors are expanding charges. You're now person of interest in multiple counts." Carissa closed her eyes. Not in defeat, in calculation. That night, alone in my bed, bruised and aching, I understood something clearly. They had tried to silence me legally. They had tried to bury me socially. And now they had tried to erase me physically. And still, I was alive. Which meant the story was no longer about survival. It was about reckoning. The courthouse steps were already crowded when I arrived. Cameras, microphones, labels, victim, widow, gold digger, survivor, liar, saint. They had called me everything. Today, they would have to call me witness. Matthew drove me. Neither of us spoke on the way. Not because there was nothing to say. Because there was too much. Grant had spent the night in a holding cell. No bail yet. Too many charges. Too much footage. Too many people had seen his fists, heard his words, felt the violence ripple through the screen, and into their quiet living rooms. When we entered the building, the crowd buzzed. Some faces held sympathy, some still held doubt, but none held mockery anymore. That had died in the grocery store parking lot. Carissa arrived 10 minutes later, not in handcuffs, not yet, but something about her had changed. Her walk was no longer effortless, her chin no longer tilted upward by habit. Her eyes scanned the room the way hunted animals scan high grass. She sat 3 rows behind me, not beside, not in front, behind, exactly where she now belonged in my story. Inside the courtroom, the air was dense. Grant was brought in through a side door, hands cuffed, wrists red, eyes hollow. Elise sobbed quietly in the second row. Carissa didn't cry. She didn't look at him, not once. The judge entered. Everything stood. Everything stilled. The charges were read: attempted aggravated assault, threatening a witness, public endangerment, violation of previous legal warnings. Grant's lawyer objected, weakly. The prosecutor stood, and then something unexpected happened. They called me first. My legs felt detached from my body as I walked to the stand. I could hear my heartbeat, not panicked, measured, like a clock. I was sworn in. My hand trembled only once, then steadied. The prosecutor began gently. "Mrs. Keaton," he said, "can you describe what happened at the grocery store on the morning of your assault?" I told it simply. No drama, No exaggeration, just facts. Where I stood, what he said, what he did. When I described the moment his fist rose, the courtroom breathed in, as one body. When he said, "You should have stayed quiet," what did you understand he meant? The prosecutor asked. I looked at Grant then, directly. He meant my voice, I said. He meant my existence. Grant dropped his eyes. Then the defense tried. Mrs. Keaton, Grant's lawyer began, isn't it true that your inheritance has caused extreme emotional distress within this family? Yes, I answered. And wouldn't you agree that your presence has been divisive? Yes, I said again. A murmur swept the room. He leaned forward. So you admit your actions contributed to this breakdown? I met his gaze calmly. No, I said. He blinked. My husband's death exposed this breakdown. I continued. It didn't create it. The judge held up a hand. The defense stopped. Then something no one expected happened. Matthew stood. He hadn't been called. He hadn't been subpoenaed. He stood anyway. I'd like to testify, he said. The courtroom turned. The judge studied him. You understand what you're asking? Yes, Matthew said. His voice was steady. Permission was granted. Matthew took the stand. I did not look at him. I could not. He faced the court. And then, he faced his brother. Grant's face cracked. Tell them, Grant whispered hoarsely. Matthew swallowed. My father didn't die confused, he said. He died betrayed. By us. Carissa shifted, sharply. The affair was a lie, Matthew continued. And we let it live because it made losing the will easier to swallow. Elise sobbed aloud now. We let her be destroyed so we wouldn't have to face what we failed to be. The courtroom was silent. Carissa whispered, stop. Matthew didn't. The truth is, he said, voice shaking at last, we didn't lose our father's money. He turned toward me. We lost our right to pretend we loved him better than she did. Grant broke then. Not screaming, not raging, crying, the deep, broken kind. Carissa stood, without permission. That is not true, she said sharply. This is manipulation. He's being coerced. The judge warned her. She ignored him. She planned everything. Carissa spat, pointing at me. She stole a family. I stood, slowly. So did you, I said quietly. The bailiff moved toward Carissa. The judge's gavel struck. Sit down, Mrs. Keaton. For the first time in her life, Carissa had to obey. By the end of the hearing, Grant was ordered held without bail pending full trial. Protective orders were issued immediately. Carissa was named an active person of interest in a conspiracy investigation. The defamation case was officially folded into a criminal inquiry. The family did not walk out together. They fragmented. Elise went with a public defender. Grant went with deputies. Matthew stayed behind. Carissa left alone. And I walked out into the sunlight, alone, and fully present. Outside, reporters surged forward. Do you feel vindicated? Do you feel justice has been served? Do you forgive your family? I stopped, turned, and answered only one question. I feel awake, I said. And then I walked away. That night, the house felt different. Not haunted, not heavy, empty, clean. For the first time since Henry's death, I opened all the windows. Cold night air swept in. I stood in the center of the living room and said aloud, they broke the family. And then, softer, but they didn't break me. The house sold in 43 days. That surprised everyone. The agents, the neighbors, the reporters who still lingered in quiet cars on the corner of the street, hoping for one more glimpse of the widow who survived. It didn't surprise me. People like to imagine that places hold power. They don't. People do. And the power had already left those walls. On the morning the final papers were signed, I walked through the house one last time, not slowly, not ceremoniously, just honestly. The living room where Henry and I had danced barefoot once after too much wine and terrible music. The kitchen where I had learned which cupboard hid the best mugs and which drawer hid his favorite late-night snacks. The bedroom where life had begun in whispers and ended in machines. I did not cry this time. Grief had already spent its storm. What remained felt like quiet respect, for what had been, and for what would never be again. Matthew helped me load the last boxes into the car. We worked without speaking, not out of tension, out of understanding. Some words only cheapen moments like this. When everything was packed, he placed one final box in the trunk. He hesitated. Where will you go? He asked. Out of reflex, I almost said, I don't know, but that wasn't true anymore. Somewhere no one knows my name, I said softly. Somewhere my story doesn't arrive before I do. He nodded. You won't come back. I shook my head. No. He swallowed. I don't blame you. I know, I said. That was our closure. Not forgiveness. Not rejection. Truth. The money from the sale settled 2 weeks later. More than I ever needed. Enough to last a lifetime. Enough to rebuild 10 times over. And for the first time in my life, I did something no one expected from me. I didn't invest it. I didn't protect it. I didn't treat it like proof of victory. I let it go, piece by piece. I funded a legal aid clinic for women accused without trial. I paid for 3 anonymous scholarships for nurses who reminded me of myself at 22. I donated quietly to shelters that never asked a woman why she ran. And then, when the ledger was balanced in a way no accountant could measure, I kept only what I needed to disappear. Grant's trial did not end with a dramatic verdict. It ended with a plea, reduced sentence, mandatory treatment, permanent restraining order. He never looked at me again. Teresa never went to prison. The law rarely punishes architects as harshly as it punishes their weapons, but she lost her reputation, her network, her influence. The world that had once protected her learned her name for the wrong reasons, and quietly, it closed its doors. On a late autumn morning, I locked the door of the house for the final time. Not the Keaton house, the small house I had bought near a coastal town where no one had ever heard of Henry, of inheritances, of betrayal, of viral videos, of courtroom wars masked as family drama. The sea was 5 minutes away. The air smelled like salt and unfinished chapters. I carried only one box inside. Just one. Inside it were Henry's letter, one photograph from the lake, the ring I never stopped wearing. Nothing else followed me into this new life. On my first night there, I sat on the porch wrapped in a borrowed blanket and listened to waves I hadn't learned the names of yet. No sirens, no phones vibrating, no accusations. For the first time in years, silence did not feel like absence. It felt like permission. Months later, a letter arrived without return address. Inside it was only a single sentence, written in unfamiliar handwriting. He deserved better than what we were. No signature. I folded it once, twice, and burned it in the kitchen sink. Some apologies arrive after the door has already closed. They are not meant to reopen it. They are meant to teach the person left behind how it was locked. Sometimes, strangers recognize my face. The internet does not forget completely, but it learns to look away. When they do recognize me, they usually whisper, with curiosity, with caution. Once, a woman in a grocery store stopped me near the bread aisle. Her hands were shaking. I just wanted to say, she said, I watched your trial, and I left my husband because of it. I held her hands. Then it mattered. I said, and that was enough. On the 1-year anniversary of Henry's death, I walked alone along the water at sunrise. I carried no flowers, no letter, no guilt. I spoke his name once into the wind, just once, and then I kept walking, not away from him, toward myself. I was banished from the reading of the will. They removed my chair. They called me a liar, a thief, a mistress, a mistake. But when the truth spoke, when the lies tore themselves apart, when the violence revealed what words had tried to hide, I learned something that no inheritance could ever teach me. You don't rebuild your life where they tried to bury you. You take the fire,